Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Charan, training support at Drake Campus. Today, we'll be presenting the topic setting up a PMO in Bandhukwala. He is the founder and CEO of Parvaz Consulting and helps PMO leaders succeed through PMO leadership support, PMO roadmap development and implementation, workshops, and other resources. He works with PMO leaders and executives to conquer the biggest challenges in meeting strategic goals, achieving operational efficiency, and delivering project value. Hussein has helped clients improve the success of the strategic initiatives by 73%, shrink their PMO setup duration by 2 times, and get their PMOs duly recognized by their CXOs. He has authored several PMO-focused publications, is a LinkedIn learning author, and speaks frequently on the subject at Project Management Institute and industry events. Hussein lives in Toronto, Canada, and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Computer Science from the College of Worcester. This webinar is being recorded, and the attendees would receive the recording in 2 working days. So before the webinar begins, some ground rules for a smooth session. Everybody will be muted to prevent any disturbance to the presenter. Please use the chat for asking questions or raise your hand. Questions will be taken by the presenter during the session via chat. You can also email any of your questions to support@greycampus.com, and we will be happy to answer. We will also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Now, over to you, Mr. Hussain.
Thanks very much for the kind introduction, Charan, and I appreciate Grey Campus having me here. And welcome everyone for joining us for setting up a PMO. Wow them in 100 days. I'm excited to go ahead and get into the mix of things. Thank you so much for joining once again. So I won't go more about me because Charan gave such a fantastic introduction. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into it. So before we start, I wanted to go ahead and sort of set the context about what a PMO is and who a PMO leader is, because there's so many definitions of PMOs that float around. So I just wanted to go ahead and set the stage in terms of what the context of this conversation is going to be and what a PMO really is, right? So to me, a PMO is a role or a department within an organization that is responsible for all things project management, right? So that includes strategy, that includes standards, governance, and execution, right? But if you look at a PMO and if you carve it out into 3 slices, you know, I like to think of it as it having a functional purpose, a structural purpose, and a disciplinary purpose, right? A functional purpose is, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the PMO being able to set standards for project management, then providing the governance for it, then providing the execution or delivery, and then sitting at the strategy table with your senior leadership and executive leadership to make sure that the right things are happening at the right time, in the right way, by the right people, right? So that's the functional aspect of it. The structural aspect of it is your general people process tools, making sure that all the processes are in place, all the people are trained appropriately, and they're functionally in touch. You know, the silos are broken down. There's great communication between people and the tools. The making sure the right tools are there within the organization. And finally, the disciplinary aspects of it, right? So this is, you know, you take project management. There's so many facets and disciplines within project management. I've sort of broken them into 4 categories here: execute, change, resources, and communicate. But what I mean really here is, by execute, it's deliverables management, it's schedule management, it's budget management. Change is your risks and issues management, for instance. Resources is your, you know, hardware, software, internal resources, external resources, third-party vendors, etc. And then communicate is obviously your reporting, your dashboarding, your assessment of how performance and progress is going along for all the projects within the periphery of the PMO, as well as the PMO itself, right? So and then if you look at a PMO for any company, you know, you will find that every company has a unique mix of some attributes of all of these, right? Not all of them are doing everything that's included within the PMO, and that's totally fine, because every company needs to have a trajectory path to the eventual acceptance and need for the PMO as a whole. And so when we go about setting up a PMO, that's something that we'll talk about shortly as well, is how do we define what's the right place to start? How do we go ahead and put set a path where you will eventually get to success quickly in the short term, and that also lays the benchmark for you for long-term growth and success for your PMO as well, right? So, and then who is a PMO leader? A PMO leader is a person who is responsible to either set up, optimize, manage, and uh, provide continuous improvement to the PMO. Many a times I've seen clients where the PMO is really an army of one. There's just one person who's part of the PMO. They're managing projects. They're hired to set up a PMO. They need to go ahead and set up a team to go about doing that. You obviously are all familiar with larger PMOs as well. There are departmental PMOs that are focused within a specific department. There are regional PMOs that are focused within certain regions. There are enterprise PMOs that are the corporate overhead across all PMOs as well. So all of those PMOs again have different flavors and functions and personalities. But let's go about talking about figuring out how we can go about creating a PMO structure that is right for your organization. But before we do that, we talked a bit about the PMO leader, and what's interesting about the PMO leader, in my what I find interesting personally, is the journey of the role of a PMO leader. Right now, I break the categories of the journeys into two buckets. One is the conventional way a person becomes a PMO leader, and the other is the non-conventional way. Right. So a conventional way is, PMO is generally associated with IT, and a lot of times, you have a coder who becomes a PMO analyst, who becomes a project manager, and then ultimately a portfolio manager and a PMO leader. Or you could have a consultant who then becomes a project manager and then becomes a program manager and a PMO leader. Or you could have a software architect who eventually then wants to become a program manager and then becomes a PMO leader. And then there are multiple permutation combinations of how conventionally someone can become a PMO leader. But the crux of the matter is the fact that most of the original points are from a tech background and IT background, and they sort of have to pass through some sort of project management experience before they become a PMO leader. So to me, that is the conventional way someone becomes a PMO leader. And then there's the non-conventional way of becoming a PMO leader. And I have seen all of these situations happen, right? So, someone who is a strategic consultant or a strategy manager within an organization is pegged to become the next PMO leader for the company. Or someone who just wants to create a PMO. In fact, I had a client who was a business analyst at an organization, and he was just so fed up of the way things were happening at his organization that he just decided to go about setting up the PMO himself. And it was a slow process for him. He did it. He took it upon himself to go about doing that. He started getting buy-in from the executive leadership slowly but surely. And then once the PMO was set up, his role was elevated to the head of customer success at the organization, just because he took that initiative. And that's what PMO leadership can do to you. It can propel your path, your career path dramatically, because it requires so many different skills and assets for you to develop, and the leadership that you show within the organization, that that ultimately it makes sense for the leadership to sort of put you through that path, because now you have literally proven on the job that you can take reins of more controls. So That was, I just want to pause for a second, right? So we talked a bit about me. We talked a bit about what the journey of a PMO leader is like. I want to take a moment to really get a spotlight on you, and I want to understand from you why you guys are all here today on this webinar. So, just as you guys are putting in chat, feel free to go ahead and type in chat. Why are you guys interested in PMOs? Are you a PMO sponsor here? Are you setting up a PMO for the first time? You want to become a PMO leader one day, that's why you're here and you want to learn about it? Are you just a project manager, or there's some other reason why you guys are here today? I'd love to go about, if you can please put some thoughts, some comments in the chat box. I'd really appreciate that to see what's going on. All right, we've got Alpha, who wants to become a PMO leader one day. Great. We have Atika, whose new role is a project coordinator. Edward is thinking of setting up a PMO. Kevin is a project manager and wants to become a PMO leader one day. Great. So we have quite a few people. And then Greg's doing a setup for the first time. And they need methodology and feedback loops in their operations. Perfect. And we have Eliza, who is currently a project manager and started building a PMO. Great. So you can see we have a good mix of everything. We have Venkata, who is a project manager in PMO as well. Great. Thank you for sharing, guys. Now, I have another question for you. Your own project management experience, what is it? And there are no right and wrong answers here. This is, again, very subjective. You guys can feel free to choose which one you feel fit right into. Are you low, new to the game, medium, that you've been dabbling for a bit, high, that you're a pro, or you're not a project manager at all, you're not into that at all? Okay, we've got a couple of highs, one medium, some Prince 2 background, couple of mediums there, new to the role, perfect. Okay, fantastic, great. Medium. Okay, thank you for sharing. Yeah, Rita, that happens a lot as well, where you don't have a formal project management experience, but you are basically learning on the job by doing projects, and you ultimately develop that cadence and the technical requirements to become a project manager. That's fantastic. And guys, in terms of the company size, are you guys working in small companies, medium companies, large companies? Okay, we've got a couple of large, a couple of small as well. Okay, large. All right, few larges, few smalls. It's a good mix. So one question that is not on this chart here, but that is not in the deck here, but one that I want to ask all of you, and I'm going to go back to these two journeys, the conventional leadership role and the non-conventional leadership role. And this question is for those 2 or 3 people who mentioned that they are currently PMO leaders. Would you consider your journey to PMO leadership a conventional journey or a non-conventional journey? A bit of both. Greg said non-conventional. Kevin said conventional. Okay, Edward is leaning towards making it conventional. All right. So we have I think we had about 3 or 4 people who said they were PMO leaders. So we have about a good, I mean, it's a small sample size, but out of 3 people, 1/3, 33% are leaning towards non-conventional and 66% towards conventional. And guys, so why I wanted to highlight that was the fact that there are many people out there who are PMO leaders in non-conventional ways. In fact, when other webinars that I've held, this ratio can go as close to 60-40, where 60% are in the conventional bucket, and 40% are in the non-conventional bucket, right? So the non-conventional journey really is not that non-conventional at all. It's just that not a lot of us talk about it. And when we look at, when we go to industry events, when we go to PMI events, when we look at social media, everybody is talking about the conventional way. Nobody's really talking about the non-conventional way. And I want to make sure that we recognize on this webinar the fact that that is something that does happen, and that's something that you guys should embrace if you feel that, and especially for the ones who are have aspirations to become a PMO leader. Even if you're not on the tech side, you can still become a PMO leader through non-conventional ways, right? And that's the beauty of this role, is there are countless ways to get the opportunity. And every organization requires something different from their PMO leaders, just because their PMO needs vary so much. And so the different skill sets that you really need to become a PMO leader, I break them into 4 distinct categories. One is the project and program management one, having that experience and knowledge. But like we already mentioned, if you're going the non-conventional way, you might have someone like Rita here who doesn't have formal project management experience, has been managing projects and then going about doing things. But at the same time, a lot of reasons why some of these non-conventional PMO leaders are become so successful is because they have a great knowledge of how the company operates, how the dynamics, the culture, the pulse of the organization is. They've already built the relationships and key credibility within the organization, so that when they are put in charge of a new role or a new department, everybody simply gravitates towards them. And the buy-in for those PMOs is significantly higher, right? So yes, while project and program management is important, it's definitely not a must-have. And I've gotten a lot of slack from a lot of people about saying something like that. But what you more need is organizational skills, right? Because know that even if the PMO starts off as a role, it ultimately becomes a department or a business unit within an organization. So how do you run a, a business unit? How do you run a department? It's not just by managing projects. You have to manage so many other aspects of it, and have to understand the business planning pieces. You have to understand the organizational strategy, making sure that you're facilitating. As a PMO leader, you have to facilitate the strategy across different departments. Sometimes you might need to have some regulatory backgrounds as well. So those are some of the organizational skills that you need to have. It's business specific. So sometimes you might have departmental focused PMOs, like in larger organizations, you could have an HR department that has its own PMO. You could have, you obviously have a lot of IT departments that have their own PMO. Sometimes you have the procurement departments that have, or vendor management departments that have their own PMOs, right? And so having some skills that are specific to that business, so having HR skills or procurement skills background or IT skills background can be helpful as a PMO leader, because not only are you just making sure that all the projects are flowing through well, but you can sit at the table to define not just the processes but also the policies, um, to optimize the effectiveness of that department. And that's the value that you can add as a PMO leader. Finally, not the least, the last but not definitely the most important in my books is management of people, right? It all comes down to how you are building relationships, how are you are facilitating things, how are you communicating things, what is the level of influence you have, how can you negotiate things. Those are situations that will make or break you as a PMO leader. And not to say that you need to have all of them at the get-go. There are some things that you learn and develop over time. Some of those things maybe required dependent on the culture and nature of the PMO and the organization. But to me, when a lot of people start, saying, argue about what does the P in PMO stand for? Is it pros? Is it projects? Is it portfolio? Is it programs? And to me, it's people, right? At the end of the day, it's all about the people. So making sure that the people skills that you have is vital. So just to recap the kind of skills that you need, definitely need the people skills and the project management skills, and then the organizational and business specific skills are as applicable as needed. So you've gone through the experiences that you've had. You have acquired the skill sets that you need. You've found the opportunity to either went through a recruitment process, or you were elevated within the organization to the role of of a PMO leader, and now you are a PMO leader, a first-time PMO leader. Congratulations. What now? What is it? What is it that you want to do now? What is it that you will do now? The interesting thing is that the clock's going to start ticking on you immediately, because even if you're not a seasoned PMO leader, if this is the very first time you're setting up a PMO leader, even then your organization is going to be turning at you, looking at you to make sure as if you were the expert, right? So I find a lot of PMO leaders who get to this position, but once they get to this position, they try to figure out what is their strategy, what are the roadmap that they're going to build, how are they going to go about getting the PMO in. A lot of people just start focusing on putting templates in place. Some people start searching for tools. Some people start looking at different things online, blogs, courses, books, and try to piecemeal everything together and make sense out of it. While at the same time pretending, I would say not pretend, I wouldn't say pretend is a harsh word, but putting, guarding the fort and ensuring that and putting a face where making sure that the faith that is put in them, that they are showing the confidence, exuding the confidence of an expert while doing about all of this, and at the same time maintaining and building key relationships within the organization, right? So this becomes a very challenging time for PMO leaders, especially the first-time PMO leaders, and a lot of the reason why the success rate of PMOs is generally so low. So what is it that you do? There are three things before you can really get ready, right? Have an awareness, right? Have the awareness of, what's going on. Just don't look at what your surroundings are, what the power structure looks like. Is there any political nuances, etc., that you need to be aware of? Have the right attitude, the can-do attitude. A lot of times, and we'll get into this as well. The PMOs have a bad rep of being, a policing organization. They say no a lot, or they just come to you when things aren't going right. But in fact, as a PMO, you should be there to help other people. To me, a PMO is the Switzerland of an organization, a chief facilitator, a master collaborator, objective, neutral, making sure that everyone is talking, everyone is connecting, there's a dialogue, and that things are getting done fluently. And that's the can-do attitude that you should have, and the urgency, right? So there's a reason why I said setting up a PMO in 100 days, right? We want to show the urgency, because a lot of times, and there are many historical aspects to this, but like I mentioned earlier, PMO is nothing but a department. But you have other departments like IT, you have other departments like accounting, like finance, like marketing, like procurement, etc. But nobody ever questions the value of those departments. Everybody gets it. Everybody understands why they need to be there. Everybody understands that the organization cannot function without them. Nobody is sort of pointing fingers at them. But unfortunately, PMO is not one of those. PMO's value always is judged. People are always looking at finding opportunity to see where the shortcomings for PMO are, and so when you are put at the top layer of this role, of this department, of the PMO, you must quickly try to show some value of the department to the rest of the stakeholders. And we'll get to that right now as well. But making sure that you have that awareness, attitude, and urgency is critical, right? And that way you'll be ready to go. And so now I want to go about sharing with you the key phases that you must address within the 100 days and beyond. And again, this is a this is a guidebook, not a recipe, right? So the days that you have in here could vary from organization to organization. There could be more overlaps with different phases depending on nature of the organization. But these are sort of just postmarks, right? And for smaller organizations, things could move really fast. For larger organizations, I've seen situations where it's taken organizations 2 years to start, to set up a complete PMO in place. And again, you want to make sure that by the time you hit phase 3, at least some elements of the PMO are in place, at least for the small to mid-sized organizations, and to show that you're actually doing what you said you would, and not just not just talking the talk. So with that said, the 4 phases are assessing the maturity, number 1. Phase 2 is establishing target state and defining the roadmap. Phase 3 is prioritization and implementation. And finally, phase 4 is continuous improvements, right? So what I want to do is, for every phase, I want to talk to you about what the key tasks are for each phase, and what the top 3 checklist items are for each phase, right? So let's go ahead and get into that. So let's talk about the first phase, assessing maturity, right? So this step is nothing more than understanding what the current state of your PMO is. If you don't have a PMO in place at this moment, that's totally fine. You can still do this phase by understanding where project management is within the organization. How are the people process tools? What is the level of maturity that they have? Understanding what has generally been the expectations from project management, what has generally been received by the resources and the assets, the project management assets that are there. And then what aspects of project management are being addressed, right? So is it work intake? Is it prioritization? Is it schedule management? Is it financial management? Is it risks and issues management? Is it all? Is it none? Is it some? What is it, right? So determining what the strengths, weaknesses, and gaps are, and then putting a clear lens, not just on how the process, people, tools work, but also how are different people, different departments communicating with each other? How is the decision making process? Is there any sort of responsibility and accountability there? Is someone taking the lead and driving decisions? Are decisions overturned quite often? How tech oriented is the organization? Do they have decent tools there? And if they do, are they being utilized to their best effect or not? These are some of the things that you need to understand and address within the first phase. So how you go about doing this is by looking at these top 3 checklist items, right? You want to make sure that the right stakeholders are identified for the PMO, right? So generally, when you get in for a PMO role, you have a sort of a dotted boundary defined for the PMO already. So what I mean by that is, whether that's an organizational-wide PMO, or whether that's a departmental or regional PMO, or even if it's an organization-wide PMO, the direction is that for the near future, let's have a focus on one regional department, so that there's some demarcation is there to make it tangible, to make it real, to make it practical and plausible for you to go about making this happen, right? So if once you have that demarcation, you don't want to just go about going to the PMO sponsor and asking Mr. or Miss PMO sponsor, what is it that you would like your PMO to do? That is not the approach. They are only one of the key stakeholders. What you must also do is, and the way I look at it is three ways. Your stakeholders are people who the PMO reports to, who it reports, who it works with, and who reports to it. So that means that all the departments that your PM is expected to interact with, key leadership, as well as your project managers, coordinators, analysts, whoever you might have at that point within the organization, get a holistic view by getting opinions from all of these people. All right, and then at the same time, if you see that there's a lot of work that's coming in for this expected PMO and you don't have the right staff and resources in place, understand what budget you have and understand how quickly you need to bring them in. And then as you start going about interviewing and speaking and with these stakeholders, I want to address two things. Number one is the opportunity to interview these stakeholders is to build positive relationships with them as well, and understand where they are, what their thoughts are on a PMO. Are they excited about it? Are they on the fence? Are they naysayers and really aren't really keen on having the PMO? So how you judge that and manage that relationship as you go about setting the PMO is critical, and this is the first step for that. Number two, once you start talking to all these stakeholders, you will understand, you will start seeing trends on what some of the challenges are, and some of those trends could be really quick wins. And what I define as a quick win is something that can have a meaningful impact by putting in very little effort in. So things like even basic tools and templates in place, even things like having a project list in place. These are some of the things that can be really put into place very quickly and can be definitely achieved within 100 days to make a quick positive impact to the organization. Moving to the second phase, establishing target state and defining the roadmap. So once you've understood, once you've had this conversation with all the stakeholders, you want to go about, assessing what has been heard the most by who, how frequently, how are you weighting that, and then how are you prioritizing all of that coming in, and once, and the challenges that you have, that were heard in phase one, essentially tell you what the roles and responsibilities of the PMO should be to address those, right? And it needs to go down to the root level. So for instance, if a stakeholder tells you that our projects just aren't getting done, okay, well, why do you think they're not getting done? Is it because our project managers aren't trained enough? Is it because that there are so many decisions that are getting overturned on and off? Is it because that resources get snagged away from all the projects? Is it because budgets get cut often? Is it because our project managers don't have control over scope? So there are so many assets to that which you need to address as part of phase one. So in phase two, you can make sure that you're targeting the right things. So for instance, if you just took at face value that schedule management is an issue, and you assume that you just need to train project managers, but the fact was that the decisions were being overturned all the time, you're really addressing the wrong root cause. And so once the PMO is out, you still haven't solved the fact that that the decisions are getting overturned all the time, which is delaying the project. So those are things that you need to get through and carve out the scope of the PMO in terms of what the roles are going to be and the nature of projects that it should address. And once you have the roles and responsibilities of the PMO, then you should define for each role and responsibility, how are you going to measure the performance of the PMO for that specific role aspect? And those could be quantitative and qualitative measures, but you should definitely be approaching that, right? So looking at it from, if we're looking at it from left to right, understanding the challenges, mapping the challenges to roles and responsibilities, mapping the roles and responsibilities to their specific performance measures, right? And so essentially, once you get through phase 2, you've got your PMO business case ground up, ready to go. You might, if you are in need for resources, now is the time to go about setting, hiring people. So you in phase 1, you understood the need for people. You have, sent out job descriptions or looked at people within the organization that could be right for the job, or looking externally and start getting people in, and identifying 1 to 2 milestones that could be achieved in 100 days. So, right, like I said, right earlier, that if you, by the end of phase 3, you should have at least some elements, if not the entire PMO, in place. And so here, by the end of phase 2, you should identify within the business case that once that first phase of the PMO, if it's a larger PMO, when the first phase gets rolled out, what are some of the things that everyone in the organization can expect to see from the PMO? That is what this 1 to 2 milestone here means. Moving on to prioritizing and implementing the PMO. So, here, my suggestion is that even if the scope of your PMO is limited, you should still have a pilot before you roll out the PMO to its full extent. And the pilot could be, again, if it's a departmental PMO, a small group within the department could could do it, or you could have a couple of projects that go through some of the new processes for that PMO is introducing, or you could have just certain functions addressed. It really depends on how the PMO needs to be, but my point is that you need to take a subset of either the functions, the stakeholders, or the roles and responsibilities of the PMO, and test that out by seeing whether A, it works, and to B, how it is being accepted and bought in by the organization, and see, this is the way to sort of test the rollout mechanism. Are the right training materials in place? Are the road shows powerful enough? Are we, is the approach in looking at this as a priority the right approach or not? Those are some of the things that you can test out from here, right? And so you can basically look at the lessons that you learn from these pilots. You can update the business case from that, and then you can go about conducting roadshows to the rest of the organization as you roll out to the rest of the PMO. By this point in time, if if the first 2 phases have gone well, by this point in time, people already know that the PMO is coming, right? And this is sort of the final nail in the coffin, where you're going about telling people, hey guys, it's finally here. It's a party. It's time to celebrate, and not the ice cream and cake type of parties that we are usually used to, but rather, hey guys, we are here and doing this department by department, or group by group, or team by team, and going to them and telling them the PMO is here. Here is what it means to you. We are doing this because we heard you say A, B, and C, and the PMO will address those things. Some of them now, some of them 3 or 6 months from now. But we wanted to go ahead and make sure that you're set and ready to go as we go about rolling out the PMO. And when you go about going this way, the stakeholders then feel that you are actually creating the PMO to help them. A PMO is not a body that is just there to tell them stuff. It's there to work with them and make sure that their roadblocks are removed. And that way you increase the buy-in for the PMO dramatically. And then the final phase is striving for continuous improvement, right? So just, this is a time where, once the entire PMO is rolled out, then continuously every 3 months, every 6 months, every 18 months, however, it seems feasible for your organization. Understand how the PMO is doing, not only just what it is responsible for, but also its own actions, making sure that what it is accountable for is also being measured. And this can be done based on the success metrics that you've identified. It can be done based on feedback loops, and understanding what the organization needs. It can be done by now looking at externally from your organization. Now, if it's a departmental PMO, you can look at other departments to see what they're doing. If it's a organizational PMO, you can see what other people within the industries are doing, and see if that might be something that the PMO can look into, and sort of elevating and constantly improving the different assets of the PMO. So making sure that the people are getting better, the tools are getting better, the processes are getting better, and then the extent and reach of the PMO is getting broader. So if it was a departmental first, now it's going into multiple departments. If it had limited functions first, now it's extending its functions, and so on. So those are the 4 steps that you need to take care of within the setup of a PMO. And these 4 phases are the same 4 phases that you will need when you're optimizing a PMO, which is something that I ask organizations to do every time. Every time an organization has a new strategy and mission and vision statements, it's a time for the PMO to go about doing that. If there are even if there are no new strategy or mission or vision statements, even I would say every 2 years a PMO should reevaluate where the organization is and what it would need the most from the PMO, to see what structural changes and functional changes it would need to make to stay relevant in the game. So I want I threw in a lot at you guys, and I know we've got a few minutes left. So I wanted to quickly rush through a few of these things with you. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of this stat from the Association for Project Management that 50% of PMOs fail in 3 years. That is, if I set up a PMO today and you ask me, Hussein, hey, is this PMO going to be a success or a failure 3 years from today? I could literally flip up a coin and say heads it's going to be successful, tails it's going to fail, because that's the probability of success, unfortunately, at this point. And there are 3 common reasons that are the result because of which these PMOs become a failure. One is the lack of executive buy-in, right? So how do you overcome executive buy-in? Or rather, how do you gain executive buy-in? One is by building the relationships and getting executives to buy into you before they buy into your ideas. If you've heard of John C. Maxwell, the famous leadership coach, that's something that he preaches all the time, that before you can prove your ideas to others, they need to be able to trust you. They need to see that you have the credibility, and that's why people who even they don't have project management experience but have relationships already built within the organization are far more successful as PMO leaders. And so, focusing if you're new to the organization, focus on getting out of your office, away from your desk, connecting with the different stakeholders, whether it's formally, informally, but really building true, genuine relationships with them, and understanding what their needs are. That will help you a long way. Obviously, educating executives on what a PMO is, what it can do, what it's there's a lot of myth out there that PMO is just about people people, process, tools. It's all about the standard setting. But PMO is much more than that. So educating, or a lot of people just get confused about and get stuck up in methodologies, right? Waterfall, hybrid, agile, and they don't they don't look at the foundational elements that make the PMO so powerful. So educating the executives on that, and then based on the 4 phases that we just talked about, especially the first 3, aligning on what the PMO's roles and responsibilities are going to be, making sure everybody is aware of that, right? Because if they have different expectations from you, but you've created expectations for the PMO, they have different expectations from you. If they don't match, it's going to fail. Perception of slowdown and red tape, right? So, I think this is something that's not a surprise for a lot of people as well. I mentioned this as well that earlier that, a lot of people are afraid of taking on PMO because they think that it's going to add more bureaucracy to the table. It's going to slow things down for them. And so what I suggest here is firstly, bend backwards to start when it comes to starting a PMO. Bend backwards as much as possible. Don't break. Be flexible, but don't be a stickler as well as when you start things off, because yes, you want to make sure that you're providing some governance, but you also don't want to get it to a level where people just get put off completely. So and this is where the whole change management aspect comes into place. You would rather get them done, get people to do things inconsistently or incorrectly, but at least them doing it is a first step. And then once they start doing it on a regular basis, they'll get better at it, right? So bending backwards from that perspective helps. One of the other things that we talk about is tools and templates quite a lot. And if you have templates designed in normal English or whatever the normal language of business is, where you're at, versus in PM speak, right? They might be much more akin to using those templates as well. And then obviously, and one thing that I mentioned earlier is, you'll have a bunch of people who will be naysayers. You'll have a bunch of people who will be on the fence, and you'll have some people who will be really excited about the PMOs. Leverage the power of those power users and early adopters, and get them to say great things about what they're expecting, what they're seeing. Use their experiences. Do newsletters, put posters on elevators. Get them to say a few things or talk on your behalf to some of the naysayers to get things moving as well. And then the common reason 3 is policing. We talked about that earlier as well. Don't be just a checkbox PMO, right? At first, tough love is better than being a stickler, being a police, right? Make sure that things are getting done. Again, if they're not done as they should be, but still getting done, that's still progress in the early days. All right. So I have some, 3 quick tips in boosting chance of success. I won't go too much into it because we're running out of time. First tip is just mindset, making sure that you're adding value both to the leadership, executive leadership, and the PMs. Don't lose sight of the PMs. They will make or break you as a PMO leader. You have to ultimately execute what the vision of the PMO is, and they are your partners in making that happen. Don't lose the faith. Learning on the job, right? So this is key. A lot of you guys are, I believe 3 or 4 of you here on the webinar are doing it as you're going about it. You're figuring stuff out. You need to get some operational feedback and some feedback loop into operations and stuff like that. Some of these things you will get by doing it, but to quickly accelerate your learning, find the right mentors either within or coaches either within the organization or outside, or experts who are focused on PMOs. I know how to guide you there. And finally, number 3, assemble the right team, right? The team that understands the organization. Especially if you're new to the organization, team that understands the organization, understands not the culture, not only just the culture and pulse, but also the tools and systems, how the data works, how that data translates into information. That all can become critical for you. So surround yourself with the right team and the right people, and you will have a solid start to setting up a great PMO in 100 days. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate your time, everyone. I know we have some time for questions. Charan, how would you like to go about taking on the questions?
Thank you, Hussein. That was great. So anybody with any questions, you could probably put it up on the chat, and Hussein can take it from there. So yeah, in 2 working days is when we will send the slide deck. I'm sorry, a recording of this session to everybody. Thank you so much, Edward, for attending this session.
So let me ask a question to all of you guys here, right? Especially the ones who are setting up a PMO right now, because I think others can learn from you as well. As you are setting, wherever you are in your journey of your PMO setup, what is the one thing that is working out well for you and one thing where you need support the most? I think sharing your experience here would be extremely valuable to the rest of the people here. And in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, like Charan said, please feel free to type it in the webinar chat and we'll address that. So Atika is saying, I guess I need a course for project coordinator. Any idea where your organization can help me? So Atika, I would need to understand, better where, what your past experience is. I know you said you were new to the role, but I also need to understand what the expectations from the project coordinator is, and what you need to learn from there. So perhaps you can email me some of those details, and I can provide you some more insights on how we can help. Okay, so, and Greg mentioned, I think this is based on his experience right now as a PMO leader, structure, consistency of methodology across multiple project offices. So Greg, you said so structure is an issue and consistency of methodology across multiple project offices. So Greg, is that, are you saying that you have multiple PMOs within your organization? And Edward is saying, I'd like to start with something very light with minimum paperwork, templates, etc. Yep. I mean, that's a great way to start, Edward. But again, tools and templates, I think maybe one way to start. I think you also need to look at the holistic picture and see what your organization really needs. Okay, so Greg, I think from a physical offices perspective, I think one thing that you should do is probably put a stick in the sand, and in conjunction with support from your leadership, and maybe focus on rolling out the PMO to a 1 or 2 offices first, and then to the rest. I'm not sure what the total number of offices, physical offices is. Is it just like 4 to 5? Is it within 20s or hundreds? I don't know. That's a lot of physical offices, 150, right? So whether it's maybe it's a set of offices within a specific region, or it's a set of offices that are have a commonality from a functional perspective, whatever it is, it needs to be contained right now. Otherwise, it's going to be, you will end up fighting too many battles at the same time, which can be difficult to do. So focusing on, a prioritized approach where you can focus on different regions and roll this out in different phases, you can address the needs of those offices accordingly, and make sure that your PMO is getting the credibility it needs based on the success of every preceding rollout. Right, so that's something that you should probably be thinking about. All right, guys, on top of the hour, any other questions or feedback? All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate your time. I believe Charan will take care of setting up the deck and the recording. If you have any questions or feedback, comments, the contact information is right there. My email as well as my phone number is here as well. Feel free to get in touch, and I wish you all the best. Over to you, Charan.
So yeah, so thank you everyone for attending, and feedbacks, comments, suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. We are at support@greycampus.com. And again, thank you so much for attending.